Hello everybody, this is Tip Top MTG here today with another Magic the Gathering video. In today's video, we are going to be taking a look at Historic Anthology IV and my opinions on the set as a whole. So, this was revealed a little while ago, and yesterday they released it into the wild. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my thoughts after I've given it like a week or so to think about it and seen some of the cards actually in action at this point. So why don't we jump right into this? So Historic Anthology IV came out on March 11th, and it was part of a relatively small update, and honestly, it's kind of interesting to see what the update kind of contained, and the fact that we got like a state of the game, but not really. It looks like they saw the backlash against State of the Games, but I'm going to do a whole video covering that at a future time. But essentially, they added Historic Anthology IV. And so for 25,000 gold or 4,000 gems, you can get yourself 4 copies of each of these cards, which, if you're going to want every card, isn't necessarily an awful deal. The issue is, that's if you want every card. For instance, I think that's the big problem with anthologies as a whole and why it makes it hard recommending to buy them. Because, yes, I may want Thraben Inspector and Declaration in Stone for my mono white decks, but do I want Spider Spawning? Probably not. And so the odds that you're going to use every card in here is quite slim. So that means the value to you is really dependent on what card you're going to use. So I would say, if you are going to use every mythic, which I doubt it, because Triumphant Reckoning, not that great. Looking at the other mythic, Sword of Body and Mind, really cool. And then I believe we have one more. And Death Shadow's actually coming in as rare. So yeah, those are the 2 mythics, and honestly, Sword of Body and Mind is the weakest of the swords. Of course, it is still a very powerful equipment, one of the best in Historic, if not the best, besides Embercleave. Because of that, it's going to see play, even though it is one of the weaker swords. I'm just curious to see how much these cards see play. And of course, I can't tell you that from a day after. But going through this, like, a lot of these cards don't seem like they're going to see a ton of play. Hamza doesn't seem like enough for +1/+1 counters. Sawtusk Demolisher doesn't seem like enough for mutate. So this really brings me back to a point I made in my original video. Historic Brawl. A lot of these cards seem like really awesome cards for Historic Brawl, and it honestly shocks me that they didn't announce it alongside this. It's a historic product. They added a bunch of cards that seem really good in Historic. We have like a new commander, for instance. So I thought, we got some Commander Legends cards, some new commanders. We are totally going to see Historic Brawl as a permanent queue, or at least another Historic Brawl event, and we really didn't get to see that in the update. But of course, this isn't about the update, this is about these cards. Now, if they would have come out and said, hey, Historic Brawl is happening, I would have said, this is an amazing Historic Anthology. Why? Because that's the wonderful thing about Historic Brawl. It means any card being added to the game is going to see play. Like, that's outside of, vanilla 2 for 2, all of these cards would have found a home because it is that commander-esque format. But outside of this, do I think this is enough? Is there a card that's powerful enough to create its own deck? A lot of people are like Death Shadow, but we're missing a lot of the key pieces that modern decks have. Now, of course, you still could, and I could see it maybe being run as a sideboard card against things like Burn, maybe, where you are going to get low on life, and it's when you're low on life that you need to make sure you're winning. So maybe we see that get integrated into Mono Black in Historic. Harmless Offering, Sawtusk Demolisher, these both seem like janky cards. Collected Conjuring seems decent, but I don't know if you're going to necessarily be able to do anything with it. Hamza does not seem to be enough to do anything with counters. This is not anything the mono black deck is necessarily going to want. Inspiring Statuary is fun, but not something that's going to be meta defining. Cold Steel Heart is just kind of meh. Blink Moth Nexus isn't going to see a ton of play. Abomination of Llanowar and the Huntmaster, these I think are going to be 2 of the most played cards because of elves being such a powerful deck. Just adding more elves is obviously going to increase that. These cards should have been in Moncat Remastered, although that is something I am going to touch on here right after I go through all of these. We have the equipment, which equipment's never been necessarily a super meta deck, and I hope it does, because I think it is such an interesting one, especially with things like Blink Moth Nexus. I don't see it happening, especially with the amount of removal currently being run. You either need to win quickly or win with control, and I don't really think this accomplishes that necessarily. Then we have, the Snow Permanents, Snow Mill. Wouldn't surprise me if, we get more Dimir control decks that now just run Snowlands and have another Snow Crab. Merit Lage's Slumber seems a little gimmicky. Don't know how much much play that we'll see. But, you know, in something like Historic Brawl, it would have been pretty awesome. Point is, you know, I'm not going to go through all of these. Point is, a lot of these cards aren't going to see any play in the meta. And yes, they're interesting for janky things, but, you know, I could probably make a case for every card seeing play in Historic Brawl, and actually a decent amount of play. One thing I do want to come back to is Torment of Scarab, Flameblade, Adapt, Faith of the Devoted, as well as, where was it? It was Inspiring Sanctuary. I know a lot of, and Emit Eternal. I know a lot of people are really upset about these inclusions because obviously we haven't talked about value yet, and I will talk a little bit more about that here in a bit, but I know a lot of people are upset about these inclusions. Why? Also Adorn Pouncer. Because they are part of sets that we just got. And they think it's a cash grab move. Oh, they took some of the most important cards for strategies out of the set and then put them in this. Here's what I think happened. I think they were designing them and they had to cut cards. So what did they do? They cut the cards that weren't necessarily great for limited and tried to make a better limited product in general. And then there was a bunch of backlash against, oh, there's all these cool cards that are missing. And so they were like, okay, we have this product where we can add cards to the format. Let's do it that way. I'm sorry, they are not trying to make money off of these 3 uncommons. You can use 12 uncommon wild cards and get all of these. And I don't know about you, but I have a ton of uncommon wild cards. So to me, because especially, you know, outside of Inspiring Sanctuary and Adorn Pouncer, it really doesn't seem that crazy to me that, and for those it doesn't seem crazy, they're just referring to the fact that these were uncommons. It doesn't seem crazy to me that they actually did this as a pro player move, not like pro player, like not professional, but like a good for the player move, just to kind of listen to feedback. And I think that taking the pessimistic route, yeah, it can look like a cash grab, and maybe it is. Maybe I'm just being too optimistic here, but I think this was actually them looking at it and be like, hey, we should include this. So yeah, that is just me. Now, let's compare it to previous historic anthologies. A lot of people are saying this is the worst one yet, and while I may have to agree that it will be the least impactful on the meta, I don't know if it's necessarily the worst. While it isn't as impactful on the meta, it does introduce some more janky things, and for those of you who watch my channel, you know I like janky things. I mean, Mutate as a whole mechanic is kind of janky. Harmless Offering, definitely janky. Collected Conjuring could even be considered that. So I think that just looking through here, it gives you a lot of potential for janky things with like Merit Lage's Slumber and that one mana rock that like splits into 8, for instance. So I think that it offers a lot of things that you can do, even something like Triumphant Reckoning. So I think for that perspective, it worked really well. But the big issue is, where are you going to go play jank? You know what would be really awesome? A Historic Brawl. And I think that this just feels awful, getting all these cards, especially ones that aren't necessarily targeted at main Historic. I mean, they are, but they feel like they're targeted more towards a casual or more janky kind of thing with a lot of these. But they're not giving us a place to play that. And I think that that's a big mistake. It almost feels like this set was designed with Historic Brawl in mind, and then they just didn't add it. Maybe there wasn't enough support for it, and at this point they had already locked it in. Maybe they're not going to do Historic Brawl, but the fact that we have not heard anything about it, I think, is pretty abysmal. If you watch my predictions video, I talked a lot about how I thought they were going to do some Historic Brawl big announcement with the release of this set, and they ended up not doing that. I think it's very much a shame, but yeah, that's gonna pretty much do it. I don't think this is gonna see too much impact on the meta in terms of value. I have a hard time telling anyone to go buy this unless you're going to use like at least 75% of the cards. If you're not, you might be better off just buying packs and using wild cards for the cards you want. 25,000 coins is a lot. Of course, it is cheaper than a normal set, but of course, you're also getting less cards for it. So yeah, I want to know your guys' thoughts on this set as a whole in the comments down below. I just thought I'd tell you some of my thoughts about power level, whether they were trying to sneak in some of those cards to get people to pay for them. I also want to talk about impact and why I think this was maybe a setup for Historic Brawl. Maybe we can be more optimistic. Yeah, so if you enjoyed, hit the like button, subscribe, stay tuned for more videos. I'll be doing one coming up somewhat shortly where I talk about the state of the games and all of that. So I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.